All right, so Yannick, you are the IO psychology advisor here at Bucketlist Reward. You're also an IO psychology PhD candidate with years of consulting experience when it comes to understanding and measuring occupational health and culture. He brings his rich academic and applied expertise to provide effective solutions to improve organizational functioning. Yannick's research focuses on how recognition, everyday interpersonal mistreatments, stress processes, and individual differences shapes those psychological and physiological outcomes across both work and academic contexts. Yannick's work aims to inform healthier and more equitable organizational environments. Yannick, is there anything else you wanted to add to this? Maybe a fun fact about yourself or the types of questions that you typically like to answer so that folks know?
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Becca, for the great introduction. I think that was very nice. Uh, yeah, I'm here. I live in Quebec City at the moment, beautiful Quebec City. I don't know if any one of you visited the place at the moment. I think it's great. The great thing about Bucket List is we can be a bit everywhere we want because it's remote. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk about culture. I think it's such a fascinating topic, and there's, a lot of ways we can measure it. There's a lot of different types of culture, many different things. I'm also open, to answer any of the questions that you have today during that webinar, right? So I'll be taking a look at the chat. So if there's anything that come up, I can stop and just answer them. Yeah, I did a lot of research in academia, but a lot of my work now is focused on practice and more practical stuff. And bridging that gap, you see really interesting things. And I'm just happy to be here and have the conversation. I think it's going to be a nice session.
Amazing. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Yannick.
I didn't
For
actually
now,
answer your question with fun fact, but yeah, fun
yes.
fact. I like I like speed a lot. Like I like moving fast, so I do enjoy skiing. Everything Formula One, go-karting, all these kind of things. And when I had my dose of speed, then I'm more, I do like watching a baseball game or something like that. So always fun as well.
No, that's awesome. So hopefully you've been having some fun following the Olympics. Lots of skiing and fast sports
Yeah,
going on there.
a lot of great.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing. All right,
awesome.
I've just shared the poll results here. Can you see it, Yannick?
Yeah.
Perfect. So for question one, how confident are we in our ability to turn engagement insights into measurable cultural change? Majority seem to hover around the middle where it's like somewhat confident, but there's gaps in the execution as well as not very confident, lacking some tool or structures. Is there anything you want to comment on for this question here?
Yeah, I think overall, that's what we typically see that most companies now do have engagement surveys that happens that do quite measure culture in pretty well, right? But then you have all that data that you receive or the dashboards that you create, and you ask yourself a question, so what do we do now? What's the next step? And in order to get there, there's things that you got to do, and a lot of the conversation today is going to be talking about these things. I'm not surprised about the data, and I think it's nice that we have an audience that's going to fit well with what we're going to be talking.
Amazing. And the next question, what is the biggest challenge when reviewing engagement data? And so I'm no, I don't want to spoil anything, but the one that's the most popular is getting leaders to take action. I think, Yannick, that's something you really want to touch on today, right?
Yeah, we will talk about it, luckily, and a bit of all of them as well, like knowing what to prioritize, connecting data to business outcomes, and even sustaining momentum after the survey. And especially if you look at knowing what to prioritize and connect data to business outcome, you have to kind of understand that pretty well in order to get leaders to take action. So once you figure that out and you diagnose your culture effectively, these are the things that you can use then to effectively communicate that to leaders and show them, if we do these things this way, based on the data that we collected, we can actually get some traction and even convince, get buy-in from leadership way more easily when you have, good data to back your claims, basically.
Amazing. And so we're very excited to hear more about that topic there. All right, last question here. After the last engagement survey, what happened? And the one with the most amount of responses is some initiatives but limited tracking. Is this something that you commonly see, Yannick?
Yeah, Yes, we do see that a lot. Like I said, we're really good at measuring it in some ways, but then it's the culture. We're going to talk about it more, but it's something that's sustained, right? So oftentimes what we can directly observe, we're going to talk about it too, but it's more the climate, and if you just focus one time or you do one or two intervention and then you stop, then there won't be any follow-up. Nothing will really change. Everything will be a temporary, right? So so the conversation will happen, but there won't be any formal plan. Some initiative will work, but you won't track them well or anything like that. So you're losing that momentum. So they're all interconnected.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Yannick. It sounds like some of the questions that folks have will get some answers here, hopefully. In the chat here, Jen just said, looking for idea. Oh, sorry, that was for the Employee Appreciation Day. But yes, Jen, we would love some more ideas as well. So, folks, please continue to put those ideas in there for what you're doing for Employee Appreciation Day. All right. So before we move on, I just wanted to make a note that Yannick has some slides prepared for today just to help with that like visualization for some of these concepts. But really, we want to make sure that it was a conversation today. So please feel free to ask questions throughout. Yannick would love to just, pepper those in and make sure it's all relevant. And if you have any comments as well as not just questions, feel free to put in the chat as well. We'll try to incorporate as much as we can into today's presentation. All right, let me pull up my a list of questions for us to get started here today.
Do you want me to share my slides now or?
Let me see what the first question is. I
Yeah,
think you did have
perfect.
a slide for this one, but the question was, yes, before we fully dive into this conversation, just wanted to talk a little bit more about the topic today. Why is diagnosing culture such a critical skill for leaders right now, Yannick?
Yeah, and I can share my slides to that a bit later, but the main things is like I said earlier, it's kind of the starting point is how many people here, do engagement data or surveys or things like that. Like just put a thumbs up if it's something that you measure every quarter or every year or something like that. See, we have a lot of them. We do all of that. And I think we're at a stage that 20 years ago, perhaps, we didn't have these things happening much. But nowadays, it's something that we do a lot. But there's still a lot of confusions that remains. And it's to what do we do with all that data? Well, what we do with it. It's so much information, sometimes overload. Okay, we know that engagement went up here and there. Uh, Turnover might going up or down. People are burned out. People are stressed out. Uh, Managers are supportive, or you have all that information, but what do you do with it? And the diagnosis part of it is asking the question why this happens. And it starts that you need a lot of planning to be able to do that in some sort of way. So you have to move away from simply looking at your data like in a descriptive way and only with dashboards, but really start looking at it towards a more strategist. Or ask yourself questions, what will drive my culture positively? What are the things that we can implement or specific like indicators uh, that will lead to improvement in our culture? And then you create your engagement strategy or like your surveying or the data that you collect to fit that kind of narrative. So you're really able to move from just describing what is happening in your organization to explaining why this happened. So why is turnover lower, right? What are the things that affects that? And a lot of companies are using, validated or existing surveys like Gallup would be an example, Energage would be another, things like that that you can use. But those questions often they give you metrics that have been proven or like to lead to an increase in engagement and in reducing turnover, burnout, and all those things. But you don't really know which one exactly impacts your organization the most. And that's when you really want to figure out in diagnosing the data. Because when you figure that out, then you can actually quantify the impact that a specific metric has. And you can even put a monetary value to it. And you can then convince leader and tell them and your executive leadership, if we fix that issue that showed that, let's say, because people feel that there's not collaborating enough in the organization, that leads them to, or growth would be another one, right? So let's say people feel that there's not enough growth happening, they cannot get promoted or anything. And you see that has a huge impact when you cross-reference that with, let's say, turnover or turnover intention or satisfaction. You can see there's a pattern, or you could observe that could be something else that, if you have a better system in place to improve growth, then that would lead, to a great reduction in turnover, which ultimately would save like thousands to millions of dollars in revenue every year. So
Hmm. I love what you're
Jesus,
saying here, Yannick.
exactly.
Did you want me to share the slide for you, or did you want to share the slide?
I'll do that right now if that's fine.
Yeah, totally. I think
My
the
bad. I
slide
kind of
really.
explained that.
Oh no, I think the slide really encompasses what you've been saying here. So that would be great.
Do I have two screens? Should I screen here? So can we see my slides here?
Yeah, maybe the next one. This one was a
Yeah,
hidden
perfect.
slide.
So that's kind of what I explained here, basically, right? So why diagnosing culture is critical? Simply because that you've kind of stopped guessing. We know that culture drives performance, retention, and all those things. So if you can uncover, what are the things you bridge the interpretation gap, what are the things that will lead to lower turnover, lower burnout, and all of these things, then you can target those leading indicators, right? Which these are all the things that could lead to reduce one of your organizational health factors or lagging indicators that I call them. And these would be retention, these would be absenteeism, this would be burnout, stress. What, reduces these things or improve engagement? And when you figure exactly what are those leading indicators, then you can solve that bottleneck, right? You can identify what is the little things now that we can fix that will lead us, to have great impact. And that's going to give you that data will get you buy-in from leadership as well.
You're saying there's little things that you can look at because definitely there's a lot of aspects. And I believe it before when we chatted about this, Yannick, you shared a couple of like really interesting things that you've used to help diagnose culture in the past. Like, you've looked at friendship, you looked at control for jobs. Could you tell us a little bit more about the types of things that you can think about looking at?
Yeah, there's many things, and a lot of things are surprising as well. And like I said, there's many different, like I'll go to that slide quickly here because it kind of encompasses it in a way. But these are all kind of leading indicators, all things that can quickly affect, your culture, like psychological safety, belonging, recognition, frequency, beliefs and organizational values, manager effectiveness, peer relationship, and things like that. They all proven to work in some way. If you improve these, you will improve your culture over time. But it's not consistent across every organization or everything, right? For a specific organization, it might be a specific thing. And something interesting I found once was actually, peer relationship or mentorship is that there was people at work that they had no like real friends in their workplace, and that impacted their mood a lot and different things. And simply increasing the amount of activities that they did daily or like weekly or monthly actually had a great impact on the culture. It's probably not a fix for every organization, right? But it will be for some. So it's kind of identifying what are those things. Another one would be mentorship, right? People felt that they couldn't grow. So you added that mentorship program, then you tracked, the impact of it on turnover, on engagement, and all these things, on burnout, stress. And once you kind of see these impact, then you can focus on those specific things. Because if you measure all of them, then some of them might be impactful while others might not be. It depends on the culture of your whole organization, if that makes sense.
Amazing. Awesome. So I would love to have the next question now. And it actually, Jordan asked this exact question in the Q&A, so we'll just hit answer live. When people say culture, because we're talking about diagnosing our culture, right? So let's talk about what the definition is. So in your opinion, Yannick, when we're talking about diagnosing culture today, what exactly are we referring to?
Yeah, so I have a nice slide for that, and I've put a really, really boring definition for all of you right there as well. But I'll let you read it. But basically, what it is kind of the vibe of the company. How does it feel? What do people do here? How does it feel to work for a specific company and things like that? And something about culture and why it's so hard to measure in some ways, and it's confusing, and you end up with a big engagement data survey. One of the reasons is because it can be so many different things. It's dependent on your people and also the vision that leadership talks about. So it's really closely tied to organizational values, right? So an organization that has clear organizational values and communicate them clearly to their company and employees, then the likelihood of people working towards that mission it is way higher, right? And you want people to all follow in the same direction. So you want people to agree on the values that you have and things like that. And these can change. Like values can be, as an example, at Bucketlist, like our organizational values are raise the bar, get it done, care for the customers and each other, and also achieve life's goals. So everything we kind of do, we're reminded of doing it with that kind of purpose in mind. And that brings us all closer together. And when that's clear, then, everyone kind of works toward the same goal. So it takes time to build. You have to work, might make efforts. You have to measure different things in order to do that. And it's really hard to observe directly, right? That's why it takes time. And if you don't manage that properly, I said that your people will create their own culture over time. Let's say leadership doesn't say anything, they let you whatever. People will do things, will create their own culture over time. And there's a high chance that the culture between team will vary. So when everyone has to work together in a way, then the cohesion won't be as good simply because that was not clear and things like that. Does that make sense? And does that answer the question in the chat?
Think that's a great one. I remember we talked about culture at Bucketlist one time, Yannick, and you were saying that like one of the things that really stands out as like part of the culture for you is that every time we get on a call, somebody inevitably will say, Happy Thursday or like happy whatever the day is. And it just really adds like we tend to describe our culture as like more positive. And so it's like, how do you measure that? And this is one of like the indicators of like that positivity, like the language we're using to
Yeah.
like say hello to each other among all the other things that we do. So
And that's exactly the care, for each other, right? And that's the thing specific I found at Bucket List that was really nice. Yeah. Now I say all the time, Happy Thursday, like, when I'm before a meeting. It's something I never said in my life, so that was pretty cool.
yeah, you also slack it to me too. It's really nice as well. All right. In the chat here, Denise says, makes sense. I have seen this. And Callan, Jillian are just sharing the vibe of their culture as well. So we have words like warm, hardworking, thoughtful, positive, compassionate, flexible. And Jen is sharing that they also have a great culture there. They do a lot of get-togethers, hold monthly events, to do a lot together. Also online trivia and bingo. So that's very inclusive for those who are, working in different locations as well and can kind of do it more asyncly or more to their own convenience, which is nice. Caring amidst overwhelming and uncertainty, which is very important at
All
work.
great. Yeah. All great. Awesome values.
All right. Well, hopefully, Jordan, that answers your question there. All right. Next question, follow-up question for you, Yannick, on this topic of culture. You've also told me about the concept of a climate and that culture and climate, sometimes people do use that interchangeably. So what is the difference between that and how would you define each of those?
Yeah. So, culture, you can see it as the things that happens over time. Climate is more of the mood or atmosphere. That can change really quickly. And when you measure things, when you do engagement survey and things like that, the thing that you're really influencing at the beginning is climate. But if you consistently make effort, and you consistently measure it, you consistently revamp your goals, missions, and things like that, and see what works, see what doesn't, then that can influence your culture over time. So that climate will become ingrained in your culture. And people will say, okay, that's how things happen here because I saw it so many times, that's the way we do it. So eventually it's part of the normal life of how things happen here in this organization. So it's more fluid, it's more changeable. So that's why it's good and bad in a way, because if you say you have your culture is not that great in it might be, not that positive or toxic in certain ways, then yes, it's going to take some time to improve, but you can see results pretty quick, if you intervene quickly and you start doing it. And if you keep doing it over time, then that's going to be embedded into your culture. And that's the thing. So if that's not managed properly, so of course you can have bad days, where, mistake happens or, you have bad news. That can happen, the company didn't meet goals or things like that. That's going to impact the climate. But you really want to ensure that you move quick from those events so that it doesn't impact your culture in the long run, if that makes sense.
Right. So you're saying that climate is more like the short-term things are happening, and then if it keeps repeating itself, then eventually long-term it becomes the
It
culture
could.
of
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Amazing. So now that we've done some definitions and set the groundwork for this discussion, let's talk a little bit about how to actually measure culture. I know that you mentioned it could feel a little bit abstract, it'd be hard to measure, hard to describe. So, what are some real indicators that you would recommend us looking at or thinking about to tell us what's going on beneath the surface?
Yeah. So I kind of separate that into two different things. The leading indicators, which I call the drivers, could also call that predictors in some ways. Then the lagging indicators, which is, the result or the outcomes. Uh, let's start with the lagging. The lagging is more the organizational health of your company. So when you want to measure culture, you want to measure these metrics in your surveys, engagement surveys. So are people kind of satisfied? Is how's turnover? And also a metric important to measure over turnover would be the turnover intention. So are people thinking about quitting? So in the last 12 months, how often, did you think about leaving? That's a good question you can ask because the people did not leave yet, but the people who answer that like they think about leaving, they're highly likely to leave in the near future, right? And you can also see, the relationship and cross-reference between the leading indicator, what leads to people to leave. I say engagement here, but engagement is more kind of emotional commitment. It's like, are you energized to do your work? Are you kind of motivated? Um, and are you dedicated to the company you work for? Burnout, stress, absenteeism, exit interview data are all good things to collect. Kind of gives you an overview. Like, is our culture doing well, right? And then once you know that, a lot of companies stop there. You want to figure out, so what led to the results that we got on these? Let's say you find that turnover is a bit high or turnover intention is a bit high, then what of the variables or leading indicators actually led to these things? And a lot of things have been proven to lead to that, based on years and years and years of research. So here's a few example, like psychological safety is one of them, which is just are you allowed to be yourself at work? Are you allowed to voice your opinion? Are you allowed to make mistakes without being blamed? That's a big one. Belonging, do you feel part of the group? Do you feel valued? Recognition, do you get recognized at work? Do you receive recognition of good quality? The belief in organizational values, you have a good fit with the mission and purpose of the organization and where it's going, and so on, right? The list keeps going, but you can measure all of them and say, oh, we're really, low on, let's say, autonomy, but perhaps it doesn't impact turnover that much, so you shouldn't focus too much on it, right? So that's why measuring those things, in my opinion, is important. And as leading indicators, you can also use any intervention or initiative that you started and see if impacts all of these things. So that would be a good way to do that. And of course, surveys are one of the best way to do it. And any like open-ended texts or questions that you can ask as well, where people can really voice themselves and say what they think about the organization is useful as well.
That is such a good segue into our next question, Yannick. So we really want to talk about because a lot of us do surveys to get this data. And so what does a good culture or engagement survey actually look like? And I know that you're very good at this section, so I'm very excited to for you to show us all your pointers on what we should be thinking about doing.
Yeah. So when building a survey or just collecting data as a whole, or you want to improve culture, you're collecting data to um, to improve your culture. I think the things that we don't necessarily do is defining the purpose. Why, what are we trying to uncover here? What the decision with the data from the survey inform or any other, it doesn't have, if it's not survey, it's something else. What will that uncover, right? Because if you don't ask this question and you just measure a bunch of variables and things like that, first of all, the survey would be long, which is not a bad thing if people, take the time, but often if the survey is too long, people, either won't do it or they'll just drop off and things like that. So keeping it short is important. But yeah, so just kind of asking yourself those questions. What can we do to improve our culture in some ways? And you think about that, and then you can create some specific questions that you believe will influence that, right? So let's say that people feel that they cannot grow. You did a survey before and you asked people, what's one of the big problem we have here that affects our culture? And people say, I feel that, people don't get promoted, perhaps. That's something that could come up. So you could start trying to, ask about mentorship programs that you want to build up and things like that, and test its impact. Is it going to work? And yeah, and then you test its effectiveness, let's say on the key indicators that I mentioned before, the lagging ones like turnover intention, burnout, stress, and so on. And that will limit your survey. We'll keep it short so people can do it. More people will respond to it. There'll be less bias in your survey simply because people like they won't be fatigued by answering 60 questions and taking 15, 20 minutes to do it. A 5 minute survey, 10, 15 question is more than enough if you have a clear purpose. And then when you write your question, you really want to focus on the quality of the question. Make sure there's not too many ideas in your question. They're not leading and that they're simple and easy to understand. Because otherwise, you're adding bias to your survey as well. And then you design it for action, right? So make sure you can also like transform it into quantitative data. So transform the answers in numbers. And a good way to do that is using a 5 point or 7 point scale, right? So let's say you use a question, how often you think about leaving in your organization, right? And never could be a one, and a seven could be every day I think about leaving kind of thing, or very often. So then you quantify that and you can actually calculate the average and put numbers on it. A lot of people do that, and that's fine. We're already doing that really well, but just make sure that you can quantify your survey. And the most important, I would say, is make sure it's anonymous. Uh, and explain the process to your employees as to why this and what action are you actually taking to make it anonymous. Because if it's not anonymous, you're adding bias, like, and people will lie. Will either lie or won't do it. And that's a pattern you'll see consistently. And even like you say it's anonymous, like explain the process because it happened to many employees over time. Even happened to me in the organization I used to work for, where, the survey was anonymous, but then it was not, right? So you explain the process. How can they be sure that it is? And then when they know, then they'll tell you the real thing because you're asking employees to be vulnerable here, to tell them what they really think about people that have power over them sometimes and what they think about the company and things like that. So never look at individual scores. Always, always, always aggregate everything and make sure you cannot identify any of the employees. I would say it's the best. It's like a privacy thing, right? Security thing that you want to do. And that's how you're going to get the best results out of your survey as well.
You got some claps there for anonymity, so I think a lot of folks are agreeing with that. I know, I just wanted to share a quick question I saw a question here somewhere, but someone was asking Adriana, I found it. Can you provide specific examples of questions that we can use that are not leading? And so I know on your next slide with the common survey mistakes, if you want to pull that one up, you could totally share a bit more about that as well. And um,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so I have that slide as well.
yeah.
Once we get there,
Yeah, do
I
you want
guess we
to? Yeah, I think we can go to that next
is it the
slide
next
here
one?
as
Oh,
well.
okay, it's the
Yeah,
next
it's just
one
right
there.
there. Yeah.
So these are just a few examples. But what I would say is like I know the topic of AI and ChatGPT and Gemini might come in as well, but a really, 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 really good way as well to create good survey questions nowadays is you know, take those mistakes here, double-barreled, leading, double negative, jargon, assumptive, and things like that. And just asking ChatGPT, make, me a set of questions. I want to measure this specific thing. I want to measure, growth or peer relationships or anything. But I want really specific and good questions to measure that and make sure it's not double-barreled, it's not leading, it's not double negative, and I can use it in a survey and have good recommendations from it and stuff. And it will be really good at giving you really good questions as well. Here I have a few example and kind of tell you why it's bad. So let's say double barrel question is how often that measure recognition as a whole, right? So how often do you receive recognition at work from leaders and peers? It's not a bad question. It's a really good question. The only thing is that you have two components here. You have leaders and peers. You have two topics, and these two things, peer recognition and leader recognition, impacts people differently. Uh, so you would want those to be separate so you can investigate the impact of both leader and peer relationship, let's say on turnover intentions or things like that, right? Or engagements and burnout and so on. Because if you put them together, then you remove that superpower of being able to differentiate between both of them. So basically, you have two topics in one question here. You have peer and leader. So you can just change it for how often do you receive recognition at work from a peer.
Amazing. And I know we're sending these slides out afterwards as well. So I'm sure if anyone is struggling to take down notes right now, no worries. We'll send this out afterwards. And Yannick, I did have a follow-up question. So what are your favorite questions to ask to gauge something like culture? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so like I said, like if I go back to my earlier slide here, uh, I would focus on the lagging indicators where you want to know the organizational overall organizational health of that's going to give you an idea if you have a good or bad culture. If people are not satisfied, if people have high turnover, if people are not engaged, high burnout, high stress, you know, high rates of absenteeism, you have a problem, right? So these are good indicators to figure out do we have a good or bad culture. But the thing where you want to move next is really adding some of those good leading indicators, right? So of course I have a bias for recognition, for leading indicators because it's a really good way to improve culture as a whole. Like when you recognize people, it's a cheap, effective way to boost all of these, boost satisfaction, reduce turnover, boost engagement, reduce burnout, stress, and so on. It's effective. We tested it out in our company. I can talk a bit more about it later in an example. But yeah, so recognizing people frequently and of high quality is something that really works. Uh, Psychosocial safety is another big one. Make sure people can voice themselves, be who they are, feeling valued, feeling that you belong in the team. Um, yeah, all kind of these things, having some growth opportunities are all big components. But I would say the most important at the beginning is having your organizational health indicators here. And I would use turnover intention, burnout, stress, and satisfaction. These are the four I would use to measure culture.
Amazing. Awesome. I think we can totally move on to the next section about next set of questions around investigating and understanding data. And so let's say that I've done this survey, I have a lot of data now. Where should I start without getting overwhelmed?
Yeah. So, understanding your survey data. So, I don't know if you've seen that before, what we call the analytic value escalator. What we're talking about today is very much focused on the diagnostic part. But like I said before, what we do really well, or most companies do really well, is the descriptive aspect. Sorry. So basically, what happened? In my organization, how are we doing on all of these metrics? We're really low on this, we're high on that. I think overall, a lot of companies are doing really well on this. The diagnostic part is the why it happened, right? And I'm going to show an example how you do it, but it's basically, like I said, looking at those specific things, creating a survey or a procedure or process to identify what variables or what indicators will actually have an impact on my main organizational health factor, like turnover, burnout, stress, and so on. And and then you kind of measure that consistently over time. And once the pattern, you see like over time, the same pattern emerging, where when people, we support them, when we or now people, we have that mentorship program that's there now, and people like report that they get, but that's something that you implemented, right? People now meet with their senior leader monthly or whatever, and like you track that over time, and people report that they like it, and then you see that based on that data, that like the growth aspect of like, do you feel like you can grow in this company might increase over time, right? So does growth affect the variable of thinking about leaving, right? And that would be yes. So you're making an impact there. And I know that might be complicated the way I explain it, but I'll have an example to kind of quickly show it. And eventually you'll have that predictive aspect, which is not about the diagnostic, but once you kind of figure the pattern over time, you know that, oh, if we recognize people often, if we give them growth opportunities, then people will stay consistently. And you don't even have to measure turnover anymore. I mean, you're still going to do it, right? But you know that if you have a drop in growth, that's going to lead to a reduction. So you have to intervene now, or there's something wrong or something that you can do. So that's a predictive aspect. And the prescriptive is really the action that you're taking based on all the data you collected, right? So you have all of the description, all of your dashboard, then you ask the question, why did that happen? And then why you figure out why. So now you can provide good recommendation. And that's the prescriptive aspect. And you can make the jump from diagnostic to prescriptive, right? That can happen many times. But over time, you'll want to make sure that the pattern that you found in the diagnostic is consistently the same over time. So then that's, you're saving a lot of money and you're improving the culture a lot by working on these specific, leading indicators that I call.
Amazing. No, I'd love to hear your example of how you would walk from the descriptive to the prescriptive. And we are getting a lot of questions, sorry, a lot of comments and a lot
Yeah,
of questions as well. So I
we
would
can
love
answer a
for us
few
to move
questions if that's okay.
quickly.
Yeah. If you don't
Yeah.
mind, we can answer a few questions.
Yeah. I think a few of the questions were from like prior, so we can totally circle back during Q&A. So I think my vote would be we move through the rest of this really relatively quickly and then we can
Okay,
try and
perfect.
answer questions. Yeah, go for it. Your example.
Yeah, so I'll go a quick example here. Let's say we use recognition, right? Oh, my bad. Oh, is it? Okay, there you go. So, here at Bucketlist, we're kind of experts in recognition and recognition is part of our culture. So it's something that we measure and we measure with customers. So we kind of, ask ourselves. So when we design the survey, it's something we ask ourselves, what's the impact of recognition? Is something that can improve culture as a whole? Because that's our mission at the end of the day. So that was kind of the purpose. You could do it with many different things. It could be something else and have to be recognition. But basically find a way to measure recognition, right? So and there's a lot of many different ways you can do it. I'm just giving an example here of how that can be achieved in a really simple way. That's quite effective. So you want to see the impact, let's say, of leader recognition frequency on turnover intention, right? So and you could look on burnout, stress, a lot of factors, but I kept it simple. I only use turnover intention for the purpose of this example. So you ask this following question: how often do you receive recognition at work from a manager, supervisor, or other leader? And your response option are never, once a year or less, every few months, once a month, a few times a week, and daily. And then you ask yourself the question about turnover intention. So how often have you seriously considered leaving your current job? Never, almost never, rarely, occasionally, regularly, often, and very often. And then, if you do a descriptive approach, the first step in dashboards and thing, you'll have something like this. Not necessarily be like exactly like it, but like it's something you could have in your data and stuff. So for the how often do you receive recognition and work from a manager and supervisor? You see kind of all the distribution, right? You have like 27% that get recognized every few months, 12% that never get recognized. So that's kind of a problem and so on. 5% a few times a week, daily. Then you calculate the average of all of that. So 4.45 out of 7, because the scale, a 1 is a never and a 7 is a daily. So a 4.45 would be once a month to a few times a month, which is not too bad. It's pretty good. Monthly recognition is a good is pretty good the way you see an organization. And then you look all of that in terms of leader, and then you can even have like if you some companies have specific programs that like can compare you and benchmark you to other companies. So where do you fall? What's your percentile rank, right? So it could be 78%, 78 percentile as an example. So if that's the case, in terms of leader recognition, you would be in the top 20% of companies. Awesome, that's great. And then if you measure surveys regularly and over time, then you look from last year, oh look, we had a 4% increase. So that's descriptive. You present that, okay, but so what? What do I do with it? What's there's a lot of things that you don't know. You're kind of confused. So it's cool. Okay, maybe we'll try to increase turnover, but do we actually know if recognition works? What if we start or we buy a recognition program and then we increase recognition and we have a 6 out of 7 instead of a 4.45, but we don't know if it impacts any of our organizational health metrics or culture metrics, right? We're just happy that we increase recognition. That's a problem because it might not be the most single important thing that matters. So you want to test it out and figure out, does it have an impact on stress, on turnover intention, and all these things? So a way to do that, you can simply and you can use a lot of more advanced statistics and models to do that, like regression, correlations, and machine learning models, of course, but you can keep it simple. And here's a really good way of keeping it simple to see the impacts. You can separate your people into groups depending on the distribution of your data, right? So here I have about 50% that get recognized, you know, every few months, so yearly or less, so every few months, once a year, or never. And then I have the other 50% of the group, and the distribution could be different. It could be like 30-70 or 40-60. As long as it's not like 5%, you're not comparing like 12% with all the other ones. You want to make sure that, it's kind of two groups are kind of equally distributed in some way or form. But then you end up with those two groups, right? And you separate them, and you're like, so what are their both of them? What are their scores on turnover intention or them thinking about leaving? And then you can also do that on stress and other things and things like that, right? And then you look into it, and then you could and if you do it with that specific data that I have here, that's the diagnostic part, right? So you end up with a chart like this. So the group that was like the red group here, the 12, 12, and 27 is on turnover intention, they score 4.7 on average. So that would be, if you look at the scale, that would be that they think about leaving occasionally to regularly. And then you compare that to the group that get recognized monthly or more, and they think about leaving, they score only a 2.9 out of 7, which is a lot lower. So that would be almost never to rarely. So just by doing this, it gives you an idea, oh, that actual metric matters, right? So if we improve recognition, then that will have an impact. And then you can use that as a more prescriptive and take action towards it, right? And then you measure that over time as well. You don't just want to do that one time, but it's something that you can test if you consistently see the same thing.
That's so interesting because you can totally take
Yeah.
this and measure other things too. Like if you're running all of these events that you want people to show up to, and you can measure between people who do go to these events and people who don't go to these events and see what kind of like the differences are to see if that intervention you're doing is making a difference. That's really cool.
Yeah,
All
and
right,
just one
Yannick.
more thing,
Oh
if you
yeah,
don't
go for it.
mind. And then you can calculate, let's say here it's a 38% lower turnover intention from the 4.7 to the 2.9. So the way you would calculate that is you do 4.7 minus 2.9, then divide by 4.7 and times 100, that's 38%. And then you can like estimate how much money you would save, right? So I have kind of an example. You tie it to financial data. So if let's say you increase recognition by only 20%, and you have average turnover on average, which is about 13%. If you have 100 employees, you would save like 45,000 a year. And you have 1,000 employees, you will save almost 500,000 a year, right? So then when you communicate that to leadership, you let them know that if we improve these things, we'll save a lot of money, and that's going to help you to get buy-in from leadership a lot for culture initiative when you're able to showcase that. I'm done. I'm done
Amazing. No,
talking.
I love
Yeah.
that you gave a formula too. As someone who's not very good at math, that was very helpful. All right, one really quick follow-up question before we move to the last section, because I
Yep.
know we running out of time here. But because it's so pertinent, you talked about AI a little bit before, but when it comes to AI tools, because a lot of us don't have those heavy-duty analytical tools that researchers like yourself have access to, how would you suggest we use AI to help with this kind of analysis to move towards a more like diagnostic or prescriptive approach?
Yeah. So, I mean, just creating questions, AI is really good at it. So if let's say there's I don't know, there's something that you don't know how to measure effectively, it could be anything really. It could be an initiative you're working on, and you could ask ChatGPT or Gemini or Cloud, like, what would be the best way to measure that in a survey? And it's going to come up with maybe a few questions or things to measure it effectively. So creating question is a great way. And you can always say ChatGPT, make sure that it's based on valid research and things like that, and it might come up with a really good question. Uh, and then to analyze data can always be useful. Just make sure that you follow privacy rules and things like that when you use it in that way, and like there's no any identifiable information that you just feed AI on that end. But yeah, it's really good to come up with ways to tie it to financial data is also really good as well. So if you're not like savvy in math or thing like that, and you don't know how to calculate it, you say, I have those results that I found. How can I actually, link it to financial data and stuff? And it'll be able to kind of give you a logic how to calculate or estimate the money you will save or financial or ROI of the things that you want to implement to improve culture.
Hmm. And we just gotta remember
Yeah,
we clean our data before putting it into any of the
yeah, they can.
model.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, and yeah, it can do a lot of these things for you, and yeah, and there's all the aspect of automation depending on the maturity of your organization. So a lot of these things can be automated, but that's a bit more complex in terms of AI. But yeah, you can actually do that. Everything could be automated really easily. Surveys happens like you could automate surveys, right, in many ways, and then result gets analyzed. That can be automated as well. So that's other ways it could be used. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Yannick. All right, this last part, we just want to talk a little bit about how to turn insight into action. I think we can stop sharing our screen for a little
Yeah,
bit,
I'm just gonna show up. Yeah, because
Thank you. Yeah, so we had a few questions that were actually pre-submitted that I thought really reflected how we want to start thinking about taking action. And so the first question that we got was, we often see that survey fatigue isn't necessarily caused by taking the survey, but by the lack of visible action afterwards. And so how would you recommend narrowing down that complex data and decide exactly what you need to like fix? Like maybe it's like a behavioral change for a manager or just like what would you suggest other than handing someone like a 20-page report? What is the best way to take action?
yeah, that's the thing. Like it starts from the planning and everything we talked about today, right? And then if you're able to kind of have a little story about, if we fix those things in a specific way, we have the data to back it up. Uh, and then you explain it to employees. You have to be transparent about what happened, what you found. You can explain the descriptive. That's what we found. We're really high on this, but we're doing really well. Stay positive at the beginning, right? Explain why you're doing really well, because every company is doing something well. Um, so focus on that at the beginning when you're explaining surveys and things like that. And then explain the descriptive of the result. What did you find? And then you see, okay, like we're a bit lower on this aspect. We have we're quite burnt out. And that happens for a lot of companies that they're engaged, they love the work that you do, but they burned out because the job is so demanding. And you often see that in healthcare, right? But then you can observe like what are different things that we did or we're doing at the moment and see its impact. So we started doing this program and so on to improve, culture in a specific way. And we've seen that, we had a great improvement. And you say kind of those results here, people are less burned out and you show that, you showcase that to employees. So you see impact over time. If you demonstrate to both leaders and employees that you're delivering impact over time, I think they'll really appreciate it and they'll want to participate in the survey because now they feel that their voice is being heard. There's nothing better when you do a survey that you see something, oh wow, what I just said or whatever, it's been taken seriously. And if you can do that consistently, then you're going to gain trust in your company, like in your employees and things like that, and they're going to share a lot more in those type of surveys.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Yannick. I think you
Yeah,
dropped a lot of good tidbits throughout this entire presentation. So, yeah, excited just to like get the recording out there. And again, we are sharing the slides as well. So, if there's something that you didn't quite catch, no worries. We'll be sharing it into your inbox over the next few days. All right, Yannick, we did it. We do have a lot of time for Q&A. So before we do that,
awesome.
I put up the feedback poll so folks can let us know what they thought and what we should do differently for next time. Like we're super open to feedback. So I added a free form blank. Let us know if there's anything else would improve the experience for you. So yeah, just let us know what it is and we just love to iterate on these events. So thank you so much for your feedback. Really appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen now, Yannick, and do a few closing things, and then we'll save the rest of the time for Q&A.
Sounds awesome.
Great. So, I will just take a quick second to share more about Bucketlist and what it is that we do here. Bucketlist is a rewards and recognition platform that's really designed to help organizations build programs that are easy to use, well loved, and proven to deliver results, as Yannick has been sharing with the data work he's doing. And so, if you're looking to level up your culture and utilize data, Bucketlist, we're super happy to chat and share a little bit more about what it is that we do. And just as a for fun thing for this masterclass series here, we would love for Bucketlist to be on your radar. So, as a fun thank you, running a little promo. If you hop on a quick intro call with us to learn more about Bucketlist, we'll send you some themed level up swag to remember our time together.